Alright guys, talk about the Formula 1 news. Problems at Mercedes, still considered the pre-season favourites because all the other teams believe they were holding back significantly when it comes to their engine during the pre-season test. But what if they weren't? Some rumours suggesting that given the new sustainable fuels they finally put in the car, getting through 3 different power units over the course of the Bahrain test means they have to turn everything down in order to finish the Grand Prix. This could open the door to Ferrari, among others. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. We're going to start here because Formula 1 has arrived in Melbourne. Obviously not all the cars and the teams are there quite yet, but we see the trucks with some of the equipment on the back arriving in Albert Park for the Grand Prix. Next weekend it's all getting rather serious for 2026. Few updates around the world of F1 and the future of the calendar. There have been rumours in recent days around the return to Istanbul Park, the Turkish Grand Prix. There's potentially still a spot on the calendar available for 2027. So there has been talk about Albert Park. There was some discussion that it was happening for sure. Then I think Thomas Maher from Planet F1 said that was wide of the mark, which is his favourite phrase. Now Domenicali says it's not 100% confirmed, but it's definitely possible. There was also talk about going back to Bahrain for the first rounds. So it's been Australia for the last couple of years. For 2027, rumour has it that maybe Bahrain will again be back-to-back with Saudi Arabia for the first 2 rounds. Then it will be Australia, possibly back-to-back with Japan. So just some interesting rumours emerging around the future of F1. We do have the Madrid Grand Prix later this year in September, and it's meant to be on the calendar for 10 years. These are some new renders of what the track is apparently going to look like. So take this as you will. Of course, maybe they're being generous, maybe they're not. With the fans in attendance here, they've got it looking like Monza. This is an angle of the start-finish straight with all the fans that are going to be there and all these beautiful facilities. They put this image out as well, which, look, if this is anything like what we see in reality, fair play. I thought this was the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but no. This is meant to be turn 10 at the Madrid Grand Prix, which is this corner here. Yeah, it's not the best track you've ever seen. It really isn't. But turn 10 is this big banked corner. It's meant to be, the star of the show, the main attraction, and they're going to have these huge grandstands around it. Okay, fair enough. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but they're kind of going for like a Mexico City type thing here where they have this big section with grandstands on either side of it. It's going to be spectacular. This is what they say it's going to look like. We'll see. The reality is, as nice as these renders may currently appear, the track currently looks like this. So these were images as of a week ago of what the circuit currently looks like. So as you can tell, there's quite a long way to go to get the Madrid Grand Prix ready for this year, and I imagine that it's probably not going to look quite as spectacular as those renders here in 2026. Maybe in the next few years, they can add things, they can improve things, but yes, they have not too many months to go to get this all confirmed and locked in for the upcoming season. There's definitely some ambition, which I will always commend, but some people I'm sure are concerned about how this is actually going to look in reality. The other update for you all is on semi-automatic ECAT, effectively track limits we're talking about here. This has been a key issue over the last few years in Formula 1. Back in the day, they used to say circuits like Austria, we don't care about the track limits, do what you want. Even pre-2022, that was a phenomenon as well. But things have changed. Track limits on multiple circuits, we certainly see in Austria. We certainly see circuits like Austin as well, where track limits can be a major issue. The stewards, they don't get paid very much money. No, but obviously that shouldn't really matter. It does matter, but it shouldn't be relevant to track limit infringements. The point is that it's been a real challenge for the stewards to get on top of this over the last few years. We will have tons of violations that actually got tracked after the fact. We had that big drama in Austria a while ago. They've tried to resolve this to an extent because in many circuits they've now widened the white line, added this like blue line as well, or like a yellow line. effectively some sort of differentiation so that you can see clearly whether the driver was over track limits or not. But again, you've got 22 drivers now going around the track at pace. They will be breaching track limits on occasion. Maybe multiple times a lap is not impossible. The stewards to keep an eye on everything was proving basically impossible. The teams would constantly be reporting, oh, my driver said that guy in front went outside of the track. Whether he did or didn't, it was probably marginal. The stewards have to look at it. It's a bit of a nightmare. This, of course, is a primary occasion to try and bring in some sort of computer analysis, right? That is how it appears that they're bringing in this every car all turns system that will use models and computers and AI to look at everything, look at the GPS data, look at the microsector data from the cars and figure out, okay, were they in, were they out, was it very marginal? And if they were out or it was marginal, then that gets presented to, the stewards for possible review. They will then review it from there. So that seems to be the strategy. Seems good to me. If it works, will it work? That's a slightly different question. Let's talk about the teams. Lots of interesting updates as always. We know that Red Bull have been struggling with their correlation, getting this right over the last couple of years. Pierre Wache talks about exactly why that has been the case. Part of it is their old wind tunnel, right? The wind tunnel is the oldest one. It's like that World War II era Cold War wind tunnel from the 1950s, whatever. I think it's, the thing is a 1950s era wind tunnel. And he says, finally, they're going to get the new one online very shortly, but it has affected their correlation to a certain extent, which doesn't seem to have gone away because they're still using the old wind tunnel. Of course, there's no Adrian Newey there either. So they discuss some issues there, but it does appear that since the ground effect era is now over, at least these cars will still have some level of ground effect, but it's certainly not the Venturi tunnels we had for the last 4 years. It should be easier, you would think, to get the correlation to work. We'll see, but Red Bull haven't probably solved all of their issues just yet. One thing from Aston Martin, Roberto Chinchero, who has a few other things to say, we'll get to on Mercedes in a second. There is a very, very tense atmosphere at Aston Martin. On the flight back from Bahrain, I caught a glimpse of a rival engineer's telemetry, and the Honda engine's deficit was gigantic. They are so short on power that if they race in Australia, they will cause safety cars to come out. If they finish the race, they will get lapped. The last part isn't a surprise. It would be a surprise if they finished the race at this point. I don't know to what extent it's worth for them to gather data going so slow. Another viable question is how can they test the aerodynamics when the cars are so slow? If it weren't for legal obligations, they wouldn't go to the first 2 races. So now again, there was talk that yes, Australia is a write-off, but Honda are bringing upgrades to their engine because the engines are homologated for the season, but if your engine is several % off the benchmark, then you can bring upgrades from round 7, from round 14, etc., etc. But you can also bring upgrades to reliability. That's always been a thing. So there's a semi-engine freeze, but if you can say, oh, well, it's for reliability reasons or something, then you can still make changes. So it looks like Honda will do that. The initial talk was they were going to bring it in China for round 2. Now they're saying, oh, it's probably going to be Japan round 3. Of course, pretty big deal for Honda as well. So yes, the discussion has been, oh, Australia's a write-off, to now Australia and China are write-offs. Let's see in Japan. We'll see when we get to Japan what the story is by then, but it's certainly not positive for Aston Martin. Couple of updates on the Ferrari. We talked about some of these fantastic innovations they've brought to their machine for this year. This is just a little nice side-by-side here from Rosario Giuliana between last year's car and what Ferrari have cooked up for this season. You can also see the slight differences in the wheelbase, how the cars are shorter, not dramatically so, but it is reasonably noticeable, I will say, when you see them side by side like this. The inverted rear wing is fascinating. We saw yesterday that Loic Serra effectively said, yeah, it's a great idea, and, we found benefit by using it, so I imagine it will be back on the car. Of course, it will be a heavier solution, and Ollie Bearman says, although many teams just didn't think of it, Williams admitted, that was not part of our consideration for the active aerodynamics. Bearman says that teams may have considered or rejected or, let's say, not pursuing it yet because it does add weight to the car, but also it also adds lift to the back of the car, so that could counter some of that. But, in main conditions, it will be costing some performance because it's going to be heavier. But of course, there's a trade-off there, and at some point they would imagine they can get the cars light enough that this does not necessarily matter. We'll see if that really does get unveiled when the season gets underway in Australia, if Ferrari stick with it, if they bring it back, or whether they have other ideas for the time being. We also talked, however, about how it would interact with this element behind the, well, above the diffuser and just behind the exhaust, pushing that airflow upwards, helping drag further airflow up from the diffuser, how it might interact with the rear wing and all that type of stuff. The reality is, this is a tricky idea to copy because it relies on how Ferrari have set the differential with the gearbox, and it doesn't appear that any other team will be able to just slap this on the car. They might be able to slap on a smaller version to their car without too much change in their differential level, but this is not an upgrade that other teams can easily copy. So we talked about what it could be worth, because this adds downforce in multiple corner profiles. There was some discussion that it could be worth 2-3 tenths a lap. The discussion today is that it could be worth up to half a second a lap, which is a mega advantage from what is effectively a rectangular bit of metal thrown onto the back of the exhaust. But that is what it appears Ferrari have been able to cook up here. So they're making some compromises to make this happen, but apparently this is a really big performance gain, right? And we always talked about it going into the season, or a Mercedes engine might be too strong, they might have 3 tenths a lap in performance from the engine. How are the other teams going to catch that up? Are they going to be able to do it on fuel, aero, or otherwise? But, you know, a simple trick like this, obviously it's not simple, but in theory a pretty simple solution here could just give Ferrari significantly more rear downforce, and I'm sure Hamilton will be liking that as well, because, you know, the stability of the rear of the car as he tries to brake late for the corners, that has been an issue for him in recent seasons with the ground effect cars. These cars could well be different. The Ferrari might even have a special advantage in that sense. So, good reason to be optimistic about Ferrari right now. The data backs that up as well. We'll discuss that more in the coming minutes. But of course, it's a relative game here in Formula 1, and if Mercedes' engine is 2 seconds a lap faster, which it won't be, but you know, if it was theoretically like it kind of was back in 2014, then it does not really matter. The other advantage Ferrari have, of course, is on the start. At least this is our understanding, that the Ferrari-powered cars, Hamilton especially, and, well, even Behrman in the Haas, among others, had really good starts. Some discussion from Carlos Miquel that previously, if you nails the start from the most recent years, you might gain 4 meters. The difference is, what, 8 meters between where the cars are sitting? 4 meters is roughly how long the car is, right? So basically, that would be your advantage. You might gain half a car length, you might gain a position from a great start in the recent era. But this year, you can expect that advantage to triple, if not quadruple, for the difference in the starts. So if you nail the start, you should be gaining 14 meters, and that could be 4 positions by the time you get to turn 1. I'm not expecting Hamilton and Leclerc to go from P9 to P1 every race. Of course, they would prefer not to qualify that low. The point is that if you nail the start, you stand to gain more this season than previously. We think Ferrari may have some advantage there, but I think by the time the season starts, and certainly by the time it goes on, the other teams will not be far off, I would imagine. But yes, the technology and the understanding on this is still relatively unknown. But let's talk about the Mercedes piece of the puzzle, because Mercedes and Toto Wolff, they've been pretty, well, let's say aggressive with the media recently. We had Toto talking about the Epstein files, but he did say that we got told our compression ratio was illegal, which was BS, utter BS, and now the next story that comes up is that our fuel is illegal. So this was around the time where there was plenty of talk about the Petronas homologation of the fuel. Now, this, as far as I'm recording this video, has not happened yet. I don't imagine it'll be a massive issue. I'm sure it's going to get confirmed. The issue is this year that the fuel has to be tested to say, okay, it is sustainable, the fuel itself, but also the entire manufacturing process, where everything comes from, the way that everything is done, all needs to tick the boxes that it's 100% sustainable. That's going to take some time. Now, I don't really know if anyone was suggesting Mercedes fuel was illegal. Frankly, I think Toto was getting excessively aggressive with his defense here, which might say something or other, but the argument was maybe their fuel isn't ready yet and therefore they're going to have to use an inferior version for the first round in Melbourne. They're going to be at a race, that's not going to be a concern on that front, but fuel has been a key talking point, especially because in Barcelona at the pre-season shakedown, Mercedes were flawless. Their engine was running flawlessly. They were fastest of anyone according to the numbers that we saw from the testing days. Their long run pace looked brutal. And all the talk then became going into Bahrain, the pre-season test. Oh, Mercedes, the compression ratio, we've got to shut this down. There was a political game. The belief was that Mercedes were way too strong. And look, they are the pre-season favourites for a reason, that is for sure. But there could be more going on here because Robert Chinchero again says the Mercedes engine is not as reliable as they thought. In Bahrain, they threw 2 engines in the trash due to 2 different issues. That's a big deal, right? Because we did see them spending quite a lot of time in the garage. Antonelli had a couple of issues. It was some discussion. Ferrari had some issues with their sensors going haywire, but apart from that, everything was relatively smooth sailing. Mercedes, I don't know if it was a hydraulic issue, they've not revealed really, and understandably, what exactly the problems with their engines were, but they did have a couple of issues with their power unit that we had not seen up until this point. Now, McLaren, that was less true. The other Mercedes power teams was less true. But also we understand those other teams were running the older Mercedes spec. What Mercedes were running in the test was the new, latest, upgraded version of the power unit that the other teams will be getting in Australia, but not yet. But maybe they don't want to. And maybe Mercedes will have to roll it back to that previous version if this is anything to go by. So I've been told that in Australia, they may run with the engine map that a customers used in Bahrain to avoid stressing the engine. So effectively, that is, kind of saying the same thing in a way, but the argument is they might have to turn the engines down. Someone suggested to me that it was due to the type of fuel that they homologated at the last moment. Either way, they have to sacrifice performance to homologate it. So this is the key debate. Were Mercedes sandbagging in Bahrain? I'm sure they were to an extent, but also the other teams were also holding back performance, as we always know. But do Mercedes really have an immense amount of power they can deploy? Probably, but can they deploy it but also be reliable with the new fuel? That is the key one. Because it seems that in the Barcelona test, the reason why I mentioned that is because that was before they were using the new fuel. Again, even if it's not like fully homologated, they can use basically a version of that in the testing. But in the Barcelona pre-season shakedown test, basically, they were using the older fuels or some sort of hybrid fuel. Most teams, if not every team in Barcelona, were using effectively last year's fuel. The teams only started to bring that to play in Bahrain for the tests. Maybe it shouldn't be a massive surprise that Mercedes put the new Petronas e-fuel, which of course is questionable, lots of learning and lots of potential variability up and down the grid in terms of fuel, in their engines, their maxed out new power unit, and all of a sudden they run into a couple of issues. So yes, Mercedes is still well positioned, but they don't have infallibility, right? They clearly have some problems, and reliability and their engine performance with the fuel they have could be one of them. So yes, maybe they do have performance in hand, but it doesn't appear that they'll be able to just deploy all of it and dominate when we get to Australia. And even if they can get some way towards that eventuality, they will suffer to a degree with reliability if they try to push the limit. So tweet your thoughts in the comments below. Just one final thing, to Kesset, the guys at Auto Racer, do a part 2 of their testing analysis. These are some of the key takeaways. I'll leave the entire article linked down below as always. But this is what they have to say about the long run data. So they looked at the 57 lap simulations. Ferrari were the quickest at this is 1 hour, 34 minutes and 1 second, ahead of McLaren's projected 1 hour, 34.29 and Red Bull's 1 hour, 34.34. Mercedes did not complete a comparable run, but people, because this is what the engineers do, they reconstructed analysis from their long stints to produce a race time of roughly 1 hour 34 and 2 seconds, neck and neck with Ferrari. Now, again, the way that you do that analysis probably it was done in such a way that there will always be some sort of error bars there. Like, I'm sure that when you do that type of analysis, reconstructing a race sim from different stints, you would struggle to come up with an exact figure. So I'm sure that the analysis was done to kind of say, all right, they're probably in the right ballpark as Ferrari. But nonetheless, that's pretty compelling, right, for a season opener. There is a feeling that Ferrari and Mercedes are in the lead group, but as we just mentioned, reliability concerns forced conservative engine modes during testing, meaning actual performance could be higher or uncertain. So that's the point. Mercedes will have more performance. The question is, how certain and reliable will that more performance be? What do their customer teams do as well? That's a good question. Apparently as well, Leclerc's fastest laps were with 50 kilos of fuel, which is 2/3 of a tank. It used to be 100 kilos, but this year they are limited in terms of fuel down to it's not actually 75 kilos, it's based on the energy the fuel has, but effectively 75 kilos of fuel, roughly speaking, that is a full tank this year. Apparently Ferrari's pace was with substantial fuel in the tank. McLaren's car is somewhat overweight, and Red Bull's car is strong, but somewhat inconsistent, and their tyre deg was pretty bad. We talked about that yesterday in certain conditions. So those are your updates for the day. Very much intrigued to your thoughts, as always, on all of this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.